Aloha, and welcome to our Research and Writing RaW Skills Workshop series. This four-part series is a partnership with the library and the No'eau Center. This series is intended to help empower you with strategies to effectively research and write for paper assignments in your college courses. This is episode number 3, Outlining and Rewriting. Both Robin and I will be hosting this episode. Robin is a tutor coordinator at the center, and I am the Learning and Success Coordinator. In episodes 1 and 2, Karina walked you through brainstorming and researching. This video is accompanied by a quiz. If you are completing the episode for credit for a course, please complete the quiz questions as we direct you to them throughout the video. The purpose of this episode is to help you discover strategies on developing your writing process, apply methods to organize your writing, and select scholarly sources to appropriately include evidence into paragraphs.
In this episode, we'll be talking about a few steps of the writing process, and we're going to start with some activities to help you develop your thesis. When working with students on research writing in the past, I found that they sometimes have trouble moving from the research part to the writing part. You've spent all this time reading all these sources, and then when it comes time to write, sometimes it's hard to know where to start. I sometimes see students make the mistake of letting their sources drive their paper. What I mean by that is they'll focus on one source at a time. This source says this other source says that. That's not really an ideal way to be writing up research. Think about it this way. You've read all this stuff about your topic. Now you're the expert. What do you want to say based on all that you've read? We're going to do a few activities to help you with this process. Pause the video here and take 15 minutes to review your notes. Read through any writing you've done for your research, whether you have a draft, outline, notes, or an annotated bibliography. If you still have more time, skim some of your key articles or other important sources. The goal is for you to be swimming in information, to get all this information fresh in your mind. After reviewing your notes, clear your desk. Put away any articles, close any books, maybe take them off your desk, put them out of reach. For any documents open on your computer, X them out or minimize them. Have a clean sheet of paper, either a word processing document or a few sheets of actual paper and pen or pencil. So when you're doing these writing tasks, don't worry about details and sources. You can fill that stuff in later. Just focus on the ideas that you want to get across. The first writing activity we're going to do is a dialogue. I want you to write a dialogue between you and someone else about your topic. Choose someone you think is typical of the audience you're writing for. I think it helps to think of someone specific, maybe your instructor, a classmate, a friend, or a family member. Start with the question most asked about your topic and take the conversation from there, writing both parts of the dialogue. Imagine you tell this person you are researching asylum seekers. Depending on your topic, probably the first question they'll ask you is, "What is that?" or "Why is that important?" So I'm going to have you start with those questions. Here's a sample of how I might answer those questions about my topic. So if my question is, "What are asylum seekers anyway?" I might answer, asylum seekers are people who are in danger in their home countries. So that's why they are trying to immigrate to the US. There's different reasons people might be seeking asylum. It could be that they are gay and gays are persecuted in their home country, so they feel it would be safer for them to be in the US. So that is their reason for seeking asylum in the US. It could be that their home country is really unstable, like no stable government to keep the peace and keep people safe. So that's their reason to seek asylum in the US. It could be, I saw this in recent articles about asylum seekers from Central America. It's like gangs took over their town, and they're not safe unless they get involved in the gang, or like the gangs are raping people. So that's another reason some people seek asylum in the US. As for why this topic is important, I might answer, I think this topic is important because the US is somewhere a lot of people want to immigrate, because it is safer than a lot of other places. It's more stable. There are a lot of opportunities. And recently, it was all over the news that asylum seekers were being treated really badly, like having their children taken away at the border, and the children were either put in a facility, kind of like an orphanage or a jail, or in some cases, the children were put in foster homes and adopted by other families. Also, sometimes the parents who were the asylum seekers were forced or coerced into signing documents that they didn't even understand, and they later found out that they signed away their rights as parents and guardians. You can see that the writing here is a bit informal at times. It's messy and repetitive. Don't worry about all that stuff. The goal is just to get your ideas out. So pause the video here to write your dialogue. If you are completing this workshop for credit, be sure to enter your response in question 2 in the quiz. The idea is to continue the dialogue by imagining what your dialogue partner might ask next. They might ask me, how do we know if people are telling the truth when they're seeking asylum? Can the US accept all asylum seekers? Does the US accept all asylum seekers? Do asylum seekers have a positive impact in the US? Is it legal that children were taken from asylum seekers? Are there other ways asylum seekers were mistreated? This activity is helpful for thinking about what kind of information readers will need in order to understand your topic. It might even give you ideas for how to organize your draft by thinking about what information readers need first, second, third, and so on. Let's move on to our next writing activity. You're going to summarize in 1 to 2 sentences the most important thing readers should understand about your topic based on what you've learned so far. So for my topic, the thing I thought was most interesting and important was that the United States is currently violating the international law of non-refoulement by returning asylum seekers to countries where they are in danger. Pause the video here to write your summary. If you are completing this workshop for credit, be sure to enter your response in question 3 in the quiz. For this activity, first write your research question down. If your research question changed from when you first started your research, that's fine. If you're not sure what your research question is, think about what were you trying to find out through your research. So my research question, for example, is, in the United States, what rights do asylum seekers have? Then you're going to write down the answer to your research question based on what you have found through your research. So in my case, in answer to my research question, what rights do asylum seekers have? My answer based on my research is, in all countries, asylum seekers have the right of non-refoulement, which means they should not be sent back to their countries where they are in danger. In the US, asylum seekers have the right for the Attorney General to determine their fate. Pause the video here to write down your research question and the answer you found to your research question so far. If you are completing this workshop for credit, be sure to enter your responses in questions 4 and 5 in the quiz. For this activity, you're going to develop a 1 to 2 sentence thesis statement for your project. You can look back at your responses to the last 2 prompts, the most important thing you learned, and the answer to your research question, and see if one of those would work as a thesis statement. You can also combine them or revise them a bit if you like. For our sample topic, I chose to use as my thesis, the United States is currently violating the international law of non-refoulement by returning asylum seekers to countries where they are in danger. As you develop your thesis, keep in mind some of the criteria for thesis statements. Your thesis statement should tell readers what your paper is about. It should be supported in your paper. It should meet any criteria your instructor has provided, and it should be interesting. One way to make a thesis interesting is by asserting a claim that others may agree or disagree with. Once you have a thesis, you can use your thesis to create an outline. When you read your thesis, ask yourself, what will my audience expect in my draft after they read my thesis? What will I need to tell my audience in order to convince them that my thesis is supported? So in my case, I decided that I would probably first need to explain what non-refoulement is. Since that's not something I knew until I did this research, maybe I'll give some examples of cases where the US has violated non-refoulement. And then I think sometimes people might say, well, it's not only the US, other countries do it too. So maybe I'll share some of those cases too. I'll also explore the view that the US has not violated non-refoulement law and talk about what are some of the arguments on that side. And then I think I'll end by saying how even if other countries violate the law, and some say the US hasn't, the US should do a better job of following the law of non-refoulement. Now it's your turn. Use one of your responses to the last two prompts, either question 3 or 5 in the quiz, as a thesis statement and draft a really rough outline. Use the following questions as prompts. Really, it can be just a rough list of things you'll need to talk about in your paper. Pause the video here to jot down this outline. If you are completing this workshop for credit, enter your response in question 6 in the quiz.
Now that you've got an outline, we're going to talk about a way to organize your information. When writing your first draft, it is good to first ensure that your outline is fleshed out. When incorporating sources into each main point in your outline, you might discover that some points don't have enough support or evidence. You may then need to find more resources, and if you can't, you might reconsider revising that point or removing it altogether. You also might end up combining main points because you find that they're fairly similar, or further breaking down your main points if you find that one point has too many parts. But once you've fleshed out your outline, a strategy you can use when constructing body paragraphs is MEAL. MEAL stands for main idea, example, analysis, and link. M, or the main idea, is essentially your topic sentence, and that indicates to your reader what that paragraph is going to talk about. This is an example of a main idea from the topic of non-refoulement that Robin mentioned earlier. This example, some say that the U.S. has not violated the non-refoulement law because it does not apply if the asylum seeker does not cross the U.S. border, signifies that the paragraph will talk about information in regards to how the U.S. has not broken that law. E, or the example, is usually from sources that will support the main idea. Note that you can have more than one source for evidence. The example provided in the underline, in the case of recent asylum seekers from Central America, for example, they were not allowed to enter the country and instead were forced to wait in Mexico. The example provided here shows that refugees have been forced to wait in their home countries. A, or analysis, is your interpretation of this information, or better translating that evidence to your reader. Analyses also highlight the significance or importance of that evidence. You might feel like you're restating yourself, but you want to be extremely clear with what this evidence means so that your readers don't make their own inferences. The analysis in the underline states, this is a semantic issue. While the U.S. government can technically argue that non-refoulement does not apply, simply keeping asylum seekers from crossing the border is not an ethical way of avoiding non-refoulement. This analysis points that although the U.S. is technically not breaking the law, the way they're going about it is being analyzed as unethical. To close out your paragraph, you would then use L, or a link. The link is intended to connect your main point back to your overarching thesis. Earlier, Robin came up with the thesis that the United States is currently violating the international law of non-refoulement, and this example link relates back to her overall thesis. Once you put these all together, you end up with a well-organized and comprehensive body paragraph. Now we want you to try MEAL out for yourself.
We want you to practice putting together a MEAL paragraph. For this activity, our research question is, why do humans need sleep? Our thesis is, sleep helps people process information and strengthen our bodies. Here are all the sentences of a paragraph in our paper, but they're mixed up. Your task is to identify which sentences provide the main idea, example, analysis, and link in this body paragraph. Pause the video here to complete the MEAL activity. If you are completing this workshop for credit, be sure to enter your responses in questions 7 through 10 in the quiz. MEAL is a tool you can use as you draft. MEAL and drafting work hand in hand. You might find yourself going back and forth between MEAL and drafting as you go through your writing process.
With limited time and our busy schedules, often one draft is the only thing we turn into our professors, but it is important to go through at least one revision before submitting your final product. Drafting helps you to further develop your ideas, while also helping you to check and double check that you are making sure your paper makes sense for its intended audience, and that your paper is meeting its purpose. We know that your time is limited, and with managing other courses and responsibilities, you have to be reasonable with how much you can draft. This could be managed by simply mapping out when your next draft should be completed by, or your instructor may give you deadlines for each draft. Now remember, writing is a process. I cannot emphasize this enough. You are now writing your paper, but you might end up having to go back, revise, take out information, add more information, or replace it. You may also need to revise the organization or flow of your paper. But we at the Noyao Center of the Library are here for you, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Mahalo from all of us at the RaW Skills team. We would like to invite you to watch our next episode, which will be focused on citations and polishing.